Welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. I'm Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I'm filling in for Candice a few times over the summer, so thank you so much for making us a part of your day. Be sure to remember to like and share this video, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you fix that. Okay, so much to talk about today. As we know, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is in the middle of his by-election today. That is happening in Battle River Crowfoot, so stay with us for more information on that as the week rolls on. And there's a big fight brewing. It's been ongoing now on media payments. I wanted to do a little bit of a nerdy deep dive with you right now. So something came up with the State Department in the United States where US President Donald Trump's administration is in power. They came out and said basically that the Online News Act is causing problems for people accessing news. It was then twisted. The language was twisted like crazy from the Canadian side of things, saying it was Orwellian for the Trump administration to be commenting like this. Canadian press labels US government Orwellian for criticizing Canada's censorship laws. Okay, so if your head is spinning, you're not the crazy one. That is a backflip of newspeak in order for them to call that Orwellian. What's happening right now is a few things. On one hand, we've got crazy censorship laws, okay? Bill C-11 went through, and we got a bunch of other censorship laws that are coming down the pipe. People often refer to it as the online harms thing going on. In a nutshell, the Canadian government wants to be able to regulate and thus control what the average Canadian can see, hear, and share online. They're doing this behind the fig leaf of Canadiana, as if this is all about maple syrup and Anne Murray, okay? It's not, okay? Do not give the government power to control what you can see, hear, and share on the internet, folks. So they're trying to push through a bunch of censorship laws on one side. And the other side is what I want to talk about right now, and that is government-funded media, okay? Let's start off with the CBC. As you know, the CBC is taking $1.4 billion from Canadians this year alone in its funding. To put that money into perspective, that kind of money could otherwise pay the full-time salaries of 7,000 cops plus 7,000 paramedics. Full-time salaries. But instead, you're paying for the CBC. If you don't like using that example, picture any profession that makes around $100,000 per year. There's your math for you. Okay, so the CBC is taking that kind of money. Further, they just announced their new CEO a few months ago. They're paying her at the same rate that the former CEO, Catherine Tate, was getting paid. That's about $500,000 per year, like $500,000 per year. And the CBC has dismal ratings, okay? Their ratings are now getting down to the rounding error level, actually, for local newscasts. Like if you're tuning in at 6 p.m. in Calgary, or even places like Toronto, it's dismal. If you go national, you look at their CBC News Network, their primetime rating share is 1.8. That means that more than 98% of TV viewing Canadians at that time are choosing to watch something else. Even for their fiction programming, if you try to say, oh, well, people are getting bummed out by the news, they want to be entertained. Okay, look at their entertainment. Their top-rated show is the Murdoch Mysteries, which they do not produce. Okay, still 98% of Canadians are choosing to watch something else. So you're paying through the nose for the CBC. Okay, they are not being accountable when it comes to things like bonuses because all they did was jack up their salaries at the same time. They're paying their CEO the same amount, and next to nobody's watching them. And then they put out really interesting stories like this. If we can pull up the graphic here, this just hit the news. If you go to the CBC website, it's showing what they're pushing here. And they're pushing the narrative that because of climate change, you shouldn't even really own a pet dog. Look at that cute beagle. I'm sorry, my grandma had beagles when I was a kid, and it's just adorable. People often miscalculate the impact of climate choice, like owning a dog, study says. Why would the CBC pick that story? Why would they try to be guilting you and shaming you for owning a dog because of climate change? Remember when, like last week, Everybody who was fighting against the carbon tax was being called a climate change denier. And we had members of parliament saying that because you want to take a family road trip, you wanted the planet to burn down. And now all of a sudden we have Liberal MPs showing themselves at gas pumps, patting themselves on the back for getting rid of the carbon tax. The point here is, folks, is to not give up the fight, okay? The point here is to make sure you're always pushing back, including on things like government-funded media. Now, back to what the State Department was talking about in the United States, the Online News Act. You notice how on Facebook that you can't post links? The reason why that happened is this. It goes something like this. The print companies in Canada, okay, some of the print companies in Canada that would often be referred to as newspaper companies were like, hey, we need a new revenue stream. Let's figure out how to do it. Let's go to the government for help. That's a really bad idea because the government is going to screw up a 2-car parade, but they did, okay? And this is the result. So the government then said, oh, great idea. Let's charge Facebook and Google a link tax. So every time anybody posts a link to a Canadian news site on the Facebook machine, Facebook has to pay for that link. This is like charging the delivery boy for your newspaper to be distributed. It's the weirdest thing. And then, of course, predictably, news traffic plummeted on all sorts of these sites. All of a sudden, all of their clicks are going down. Why? Because human beings can't see your stuff anymore on Canada's most popular social media site. Who could have predicted this would be a disaster? Anybody with a little bit of common sense. So that's what the link tax is, or the Online News Act. Google eventually caved and they worked out some deal with the government. They are getting a little bit of money flowing through it now. Guess what? The CBC is taking a big chunk of that money. So at the end of the day, the print guys in Canada still got screwed. Now, the reason why the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is fighting this is for 2 reasons. One, the government should never pay journalists. Journalists should never be on the payroll of government because it costs so much money. This is the first reason. It isn't just the CBC that is getting taxpayers' money. No, a huge portion of the mainstream media is now dependent on government funding in Canada. That includes the Canadian press. That includes CP, which is why that story about Trump being Orwellian or the administration being Orwellian is so salty. Let's pull up a quick graphic here. I'll explain it. It shows the same headlines around the Canadian media landscape. Okay, let's take a look here. You can see it where it says Canada's economy is showing resilience against US tariffs. Why? Notice how it's the same story all the way through there, over and over and over again. So we've got the same headline in what looks to be CTV News, Toronto Sun, Toronto Star, CP24, National Post, and CBC. So for folks who don't work in media, that might look weird. It might look as if there's some, globalist entity that is phoning all these newsrooms and getting the editor to say, hey, this is your headline. No. Pull the graphic back up really quick there. There's a little byline there and a little tag you need to look for. You see that little Canadian flag where it has the quote marks around it? Canadian Press. Okay? It's all Canadian Press. Now, what the Canadian Press is basically what I would call the wire service for the mainstream media in Canada. Now, usually it's just straight up and down work. This isn't even about politics. I'm just talking about the functionality of sharing news, okay? The Canadian Press also gets funding from the Canadian media. But that is why you are seeing almost uniform coverage in many cases across the mainstream media landscape. It's because they are subscribing to the Canadian Press, because there is next to no journalists organically in a grassroots fashion in those newsrooms anymore. So it is right click and fill. And unfortunately, a huge chunk of that is now government funded. Lastly, this is why this is so important. A free press does not mean a bunch of free rolled up newspapers at like a subway station somewhere. That's not what a free press means. A free press is supposed to be free from government, free from government influence, free from government interference, and free from government funding. And guess what? If you're an average reporter and you know in the back of your head that now it's close to $30,000 of your funding for your paycheck is reliant on the federal government, how are you able to function as a journalist? How, for example, would you be able to cover an election where candidate A is saying, I will increase funding to your employer as a journalist, and candidate B is saying, I'm going to completely defund your employer as a journalist? No human being would be able to cover that game straight because it is a direct and obvious conflict of interest. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of folks who support the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who watch Juno, who watch other alternative media, are noticing that not a lot of news is getting out about how much something like the forcing of battery powered cars on everybody is going to cost you. When was the last time you heard a big mainstream media headline saying, oh my goodness, this huge mandate on EVs is going to cost Canadians $300 billion? This is going to cost people a huge amount of money. Why are we punishing people for buying a used car, punishing them with PST hikes, versus giving a whole bunch of money to rich people who are buying electric vehicles? Why aren't we hearing news on that? It could just be a coincidence, to be honest, because they just don't have the bodies to cover stuff like this, or it might have something to do with government influence based on how they're funded. Let's find out some answers. Let's find out from Dan McTeague. He's the head of Affordable Energy. Joining us now is Dan McTeague. He is, of course, with Canadians for Affordable Energy. I've known Dan for a long time. The poor gentleman, every time I need to figure out what the second carbon tax cost is in British Columbia, I'm DMing him saying, can you please figure this out? And he always has the best answers. And he is really spearheading this fight against this mandate coming down from the federal government saying, you must own an EV, or to the car dealerships, you must sell this number of EVs off of your lot. And again, it is starting in like 4 months' time. In 4 months' time, they're going to have to sell 20% as EVs, battery powered vehicles. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to throw you a pretty fresh clip. This is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who is of course running for the seat in Battle River Crowfoot, which is just up the road from me. His by-election is today, and he was asked about this EV mandate, and I wanted us to listen to it together. So let's roll it.
There's not even the electrical infrastructure. It would cost $300 billion to put in place the electrical charging stations and transmission networks to actually do that, which would be thousands of dollars of costs in higher taxes and prices for consumers for every single family. And not only would it eliminate rural communities, it would eliminate our auto sector.
Wanted to know what you thought about that last part there, which I found interesting because, of course, Ontario Premier Doug Ford just finished chatting with Prime Minister Mark Carney. And interesting what Poilievre said there is that this would really hurt Canada's auto industry. There's so much to unpack here when it comes to this mandate saying that you must own a battery powered car and they want to phase out gas and diesel. Where do you want to go with this?
Well, it's bad for consumers. Obviously, it's going to hit everyone's pocketbooks. We can't afford, and you guys know at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation just how serious the debt situation is in this country. It's far worse than 1997 when we panicked. No one knows that yet. But for the automotive sector, it is truly the death knell. And you know, Chris, I'm not talking through my hat here. I served as a media relations officer for Toyota Canada before I was elected as an MP. I know it's going to happen when 5 of the biggest companies plus a 6th, Mercedes, is now saying we just can't proceed with this kind of agenda over this timeline. It seems pretty clear to me that if the auto manufacturers are going to be ignored and consumers are going to be ignored, there really isn't much left for the federal Liberals and their friends in the NDP and the Bloc to stand on. This is a policy that is going to dramatically impact our economic outlook. And now with the United States, forget the tariffs, having not gone down the road of EV mandates, 90% of the vehicles that we make in Ontario, I'm looking right now from where I can see the Ford plant smokestacks, we're not going to be able to sell our vehicles if we all we have EVs. Americans aren't going to buy them anymore. And frankly, we shouldn't be going that route either.
You mentioned not talking through your hat. I just wanted to back up what Pierre Poilievre was saying there in his clip. He's not talking through his hat either when it comes to the $300 billion price tag. What he was referencing there was a report that is posted on the Government of Canada website.
Yep.
Natural Resources Canada says it's going to cost us upwards of $300 billion with a B to transition over to battery-powered vehicles. And I quickly did some math. It was a few months ago where I'm like, you know what? Where is that number coming from? And I did really raw math of, let's say that Santa Claus magically changed everybody's personal vehicle that we own right now in our driveways, okay, into an electric vehicle. Not a hybrid, I'll point this out. All
Yep.
battery-powered electric, folks, here with the mandate. Let's say they were all electric. We would need like 14 new, huge CANDO reactors just for personal driving. I'm not even touching on our transport trucks or any of our commercial fleet or any of that. So yeah, that's where those hundreds of billions of dollars of the price tag is coming from. And to your point that we mentioned with the CTF, the Taxpayers Federation, we've got unmoney right now. We are in a massive debt crisis.
Yes.
We do not have the cash to do this. So I'll get to the end game here soon, but I wanted to pick up a little bit on what's happening with tariffs, because of course we've got these terrible tariffs that are happening actually between Canada and China right now, and it's hurting our canola growers out here out west. And are you hearing anything from China saying we want access with our cheap battery powered cars to flood the Canadian market? Are you hearing any rumblings in that way?
Oh, they want to do it, and they can do it, and one way or another, they're going to do it. They're going to do it either via the U.S. or they're going to do it via other means through other countries. The soft belly won't be Canada saying yes or no and destroying the very product that it made. Its number one agricultural export, which is now up in the air. It, by the way, signed a permanent agreement with Australia because we were so insistent on backing something that can only be made with lots of money, as you've pointed out. But I sense that where we're going here is the government is going to have a significant ice dumping bucket on the head in order for it to get to finally move, because this is a recipe for disaster with tariffs now firmly on their way, now starting to impact. I think the next budget is going to be an absolute disaster, unless, of course, Mark Carney tries to play games and try to split the budget and make it all sorts of things that it isn't. It's going to take a lot of creative financing in order to get rid of what's about to hit Canadians. If they think it's bad now, they have no idea what's in store. There is nothing redeemable about the economy going forward, especially because the Liberals believe it's still 2015.
I wanted to stress this, that people are going, you mentioned it's 2015, if only it were 2015.
Yeah,
Just anyway, it makes you upset actually thinking about it, because the debt has been doubled, right?
Yep.
So, and Trudeau did that in 9 years, so less than a decade. It's almost as if it was deliberate or on purpose, because they did such an amazing job driving up the debt. What we spend on the debt here, folks, is $1 billion a week just on the interest payments. So for people to envision this, okay, building a new hospital costs about $1 billion, okay? So imagine all of Canada gathering around the TV station on Saturday nights, and instead of the old hockey game, we burn down a hospital. That's what we're doing with our interest payments alone on the debt. Our stress here is that we do not have the money, taxpayers don't have the money to fund this thing into happening. Do you think there's a chance that Prime Minister Carney is a pragmatist, and that he could simply say, you know what, this was a Trudeau era Liberal government thing. I'm dusting my hands off and walking away from it, because we're hitting a mathematical wall where people don't want it. I think we have a poll here from Leger that we can pull up, where Canadians are opposed to, here we go, the EV mandate. Canadians are opposed to it. You can see it right there. They say that this target is unrealistic and will cost too much. It should be rolled back. 71%. That's a really strong poll, okay? Do you think there's a chance that Carney, the pragmatist, if he's in there, will say, you know what, this is a Trudeau mess. I'm walking away from it and I'm getting rid of it?
Well, he'd be renouncing everything he stood for the past 10, 15 years. And unless he's like the old commercial of the 70s and 80s, oil of Olay, keep them guessing. I mean, the reality is that Mark Carney is going to have to recognize that it's TikTok time. It's time for him to fish or cut bait. And it's time for him to make a decision one way or another. He's leaning very heavily towards what he's always been. And if he's going to change his colors dramatically like that, I think it's going to leave a lot of his friends at Brookfield and a lot of his European friends and allies and those he's rubbed shoulders with over the past few years, scratching their heads about Mark Carney, the politician, as opposed to Mark Carney, the green wizard, basically trying to undermine economies around the world. And by the way, GFANZ is not over. The United States Antitrust Division is still going to look at what GFANZ did to try to block energy production and energy investments in the United States. It'd be awfully funny to see the United States Department of Justice summons once again Mark Carney as Prime Minister to say your companies, Brookfield and others, are going to be subject to triple damages, which actually is a reality in the United States, unlike Canada's limp-wristed Competition Act.
Can you expand a little bit for our viewers on GFANZ and what went down there?
Yeah, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. A few years ago, Mark Carney thought it'd be a great idea to have all companies in the name of sustainability. And before the 2023 confab, decided that it would be a great idea to get banks, investment companies, brokers not to invest any money in fossil fuels, oil and gas, or any of the energies that the world is currently using and continues to use in even greater sense. What he did is he targeted the United States. And of course, as the Senate inquiry under the Biden administration, Senate committee started to look into this, they realized that this is a case célèbre. It is a classic case of monopolization, of price fixing, and of course of cartelization, which I think is what the word they used. So it basically said, if you are a bank in the United States, just think of State Street, think of Vanguard, think of BlackRock, any of these big ones, and you're now engaged in saying, we're not going to invest in oil and gas because Mark Carney and his friends say so, well, you're now subject to triple damages. In other words, if the effect of what you did in the United States was to deny $10 to $20 billion in economic activity to the oil and gas sector, you're now going to be punished by $60 billion. So you know what? In a word, they short-arsed it out of there. They got out of the GFANZ and left Mark Carney looking rather sheepish because they actually have strong and integrity in their institutions to go after this kind of gamesmanship in which they were trying to block the economy. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see. No wonder there's a gulf between Canada and the United States. A little strange that Donald Trump thought Mark Carney was the best person to deal with. I think we know now why. He has no deal with them and doesn't have to worry about him, just like Trudeau.
Yeah, that was one of the strangest elections I've ever observed. Just got to say, there was so much strange head games going on, and the comments about the 51st state, it was such a tailspin that it caused within the parliamentary press gallery. It set people off. I'd be curious to know what's going on in Washington, or if they're even thinking about Canada when it comes to these sort of problems. Probably not. We do have an integrated auto market, though. And with your experience with automobiles, how this is going to sound silly, like a school child asking you, if we have an integrated like auto manufacturing system, which we do, right? I've read that a car part can cross the Canada-US border for one make or model of vehicle like 10 times. So it's all integrated. How could we force people to purchase only EVs or start increasing the quotas? It starts at 20% in 4 months' time. How can Canada do that if the United States isn't?
Well, again, it's just hoping that we can maybe trade with the Americans, or rather with the Europeans, and forget the Americans. Our trade relationship with the United States is 15 times greater than that which we trade with in Europe. So if we think we can turn that overnight, it's taken 100 years to develop. Good luck. But this is truly political virtue signaling. And the elbows up crowd that thought it was cool and trendy to be able to tell the Americans to go take a hike. You may not like Trump, but you sure as hell can't disagree with why he did it. He knows it was going to hurt Americans. He's standing up for their economy. He's not prepared to allow, someone to impose an arbitrary deadline, that says you have to have 100% vehicles by such and such a time and spend $2 to $3 trillion to obtain that. Canada doesn't have that kind of ability, and we do rely on the American market. As I mentioned, 90% of what you produce in Ontario, so that'd be the Toyota factories, the Stellantis factories, the Ford factory, the GM factories, all of those have to sell to the United States. If the Americans are not buying EVs and not being told that they have to buy EVs, now that there's a new president and a new administration, new EPA in town, it means that there's no market for this kind of stuff. So forcing this on Canadians, I don't know why they want us to drive all these, over-glorified electric golf carts, because frankly, they're not practical, especially in Canada, which is a hell of a lot colder than the United States, and for which we don't have as you pointed out very correctly, we don't have the electrical infrastructure nor the money to back it up.
No, we don't have the power for this. We don't have the money for this. And we don't have the cash to keep on handing out rebates and stuff for this. I wanted to pull up a quick graphic here from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which I found was a really interesting compare and contrast. Now, across some Western provinces in places like British Columbia and Manitoba in particular, there's this disgusting thing that the provincial government does, and that is they charge provincial sales tax, a PST, on used vehicles. So it doesn't matter how old the thing is, doesn't matter how many times it's been bought and sold and they've gotten their pound of flesh before, they still take a PST. It's a great experiment here. If you look here on the right, okay, a used Toyota Corolla that somebody has saved up money for in order to get to work, they spend $8,500. That's a pretty good price for a used Corolla. They will be hit with a PST bill from the NDP Manitoba government for close to $600. Same place, same province. If you got good money and you spend 55 grand on some fancy electric Mustang, you're going to get a $4,000 check from the government. Now, of course, we all know the government doesn't have money. They're taking taxpayers' money, including from that person saving up for the Toyota Camry, and they're giving it to that much more financially better off person who's buying that electric Mustang. Oh, and we have stats. Yes, indeed. The average person spending money on something like an electric Mustang, they're making well over $100,000 per year. So I will point this out that this is also, it's a tax on the working poor in this country. And it seems to be an all-out attack, I would say, on normal vehicles, Dan.
Yes. Kris, it's really getting going from the sublime to the ridiculous when you consider what we're trying to tax, and try to get a resale PST on a used electric vehicle. There's none, because the car lots in this country are filled with electric vehicles. They can't sell them. So if they can't sell them now, and especially without incentives, the federal government has removed its incentive. How are they going to be able to get it 20%, 30%, 40%, all the way to 100% by 2035 and penalize every single car dealer for not reaching that? I can tell you, I've spoken to a number of car salesmen in the past month. They've been talking to me openly. They are very worried about this, and they're like the people I remember in 1984 who, when the federal Liberals of my party decided it'd be a good idea to tax insurance plans, came out knocking on doors and nailed us badly in 1984. I think the same thing is going to happen here, but not until the damage is done. $20,000 per vehicle as a penalty if you go over that ratio of 5 to 1, and it'll be 4 to 1, 3 to 1, 2 to 1. Then all of them have to be that way. I suspect that this is a recipe for political, but most importantly, economic damage, the likes of which it won't just damage the sales of vehicles, it's going to damage the entire automotive sector. So, Doug Ford, I hope this morning when you met with Mark Carney, you gave that message to him, because you don't have enough money, you don't have enough debt that you can incur to make up the difference of what's about to happen, especially if these auto plants decide to rightly pack up and leave.
Yeah, he better have. I will say I'm not impressed. The amount of debt that Premier Doug Ford is saddling provincial Ontario taxpayers with is gross. So I talked about the interest on the federal debt. The interest on the provincial debt for Ontario costs Ontario taxpayers $300 million a week. I couldn't believe that math. I checked it 4 times. It's true. The Ontario provincial debt. Now, it's not all Doug Ford's fault, but a big chunk of it is, okay? That interest is costing taxpayers $300 million a week. To put it another way, picture burning down or deleting 300 homes per week. That's how much your interest is costing you on your provincial debt. So he better pull his socks up, and he better be standing up to Prime Minister Mark Carney on this. 2 quick questions to finish this off. One, I've noticed something in the regulations and in the language that the government is posting online in regards to this EV mandate. And I've noticed that they've sprinkled in the word availability a lot now. That was not the case when they were first talking about this. They were talking about sales quotas. So starting in 4 months' time, 2026, you're right, 20% had to be EV. Now, my understanding all this time was that was a quota, meaning if you don't have 20% of sales and you're a car dealership, you're going to start incurring the penalties that you were just mentioning. Now I'm noticing some squishy language that is in through there saying, oh, it has to have 20% availability for sale. Are you noticing any softening language coming from the government on this?
Well, yeah, maybe they are trying to soft pedal it because they've taken a hard line up to now, but it's, thankfully, Pierre Poilievre will be elected tonight. I don't care by what percentage. I'm not sure if he needs 130% to make some of the lefty media happy, but the reality is that he's going to be able to hold the government's feet to the fire. This is like the carbon tax one, which you and I, Kris, fought against, which the Liberals finally had to throw in the towel in order to get reelected. This is going to be the next one. If they don't do this, the CTF, the Canadians for Affordable Energy, are going to be on them like a hungry dog on a brand new fresh steak bone.
I think it's in Gone with the Wind where they say it's a duck on a June bug. Yeah. So I love that term. So lastly, I just wanted to stress this for anybody who's thinking, oh, that's a 2035 problem. I don't need to focus on that right now. No, the mandate starts kicking in. The screws start tightening on these auto sellers in 2026, which is in 4 months' time. Can you just briefly explain to people, like to me, as if I'm 6 personally, how this affects the market or the ability for someone to be able to make a sale? Because it'll start skewing the supply, right?
It will, big time, and it means that if the competition for internal combustion engines will increase by 20%. In other words, if car dealers are being forced to sell 1 in 5 have to be EVs, and no one buys them, which is likely the case, or very few, then you're going to wind up in a situation where, in order to go in and to be one of the 80% this year, 70% the year after, who wants an internal combustion engine, you're going to have to pay a premium for it, because the demand will be super hot, especially when it comes to replacement vehicles. And by the way, Kris, vehicle sales last month were extraordinary. People are buying their internal combustion engines. They know what's coming. And so on January 1st and throughout the year 2026, those car dealers and those companies don't make that target, then they're going to pay massive penalties, and consumers are going to wind up holding the bag, as they do for everything else. And we talked about the second carbon tax, the clean fuel standard. A lot of that money's already there. It's 4 or 5 cents a liter already being charged. You have 15%, ethanol being added to gasoline, which is crap for a lot of vehicles. But most importantly, they have to now, as refineries, go out and buy chargers for vehicles in order to get the carbon credits, so that if you will, it's an indulgence payment that they have to make, which you and I as consumers have to make. We are slowly but surely strangling our economy and our ability to make ends meet. Well done, Canada. That's why it takes 138 pennies to buy a US dollar, and your purchase power is going out the window.
That is perfectly said. And for people who don't understand why Dan called it an indulgence, look it up. Look up what indulgences were back through human history. That's also why we call it a sin tax, okay? Because they're just trying to punish you for living your life. Dan McTeague, Canadians for Affordable Energy. Briefly, where can people find your work?
AffordableEnergy.ca is the work we're doing. We try to stay on this every week. And of course, work with CTF and others. We're all organizations heading towards the same direction, trying to protect consumers. And we've got a damn good reputation between all of us in doing that.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here, Kris. Thanks for having me.
You bet. That, once again, was Dan McTeague. He is the head of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Folks might remember him from Gas Buddy. So he was the guy that was always able to tell you what the gas price is going to be tomorrow, because he knows the market. He knows the industry that well that he'd be able to predict, almost like magic, that it was going to go up or down even by a few cents. I will also point out, one of the reasons why Dan is so knowledgeable is because he was a longtime member of Parliament for the Liberal government. Yes, back in the day when then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was the head of the Liberal government, things were different. They weren't perfect, but they were different. Back then, you might remember that Paul Martin was the finance minister. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation gave him an award because he balanced the budget. He stopped deficit spending. So this is why it's super important to talk to people like Dan McTeague, who's a veteran of the political arena, but is nonpartisan. He was one of the lead fighters against the Trudeau government's stupid moves on things like carbon taxes, as you heard him just mention, and the electric vehicle mandate. So definitely a good resource there. Folks, this is really important because it may not be affecting your car right this second in your driveway, but the government has no business in the garages of the nation. If we let them say that now 20% of sales must be this certain kind of vehicle and it's going to cost taxpayers an arm and a leg, we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that we do not have, they'll just be able to get away with anything. So make sure that you call up your member of parliament, no matter which party they're in, especially if they're within the Liberals, and tell them that this electric vehicle mandate is a non-starter. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. It's really important to share conversations like you just heard with your friends and family who are open to waking up. Okay, they might be tuning into the mainstream media every night at 6 o'clock, one of the 8 people who are still doing that, okay? But it's really important that you get them to support things like independent media. That's why you should make sure, if you're not a subscriber yet to Juno News, that you make that change. Get in there, subscribe to Juno News, go onto YouTube, like these videos, and share them with your friends.